Welcome back to MSME Talk podcast for micro, small, medium enterprise businesses and startups. This is episode number 47 of MSME Talk, Navigating the Grey Zone, Building a Legal Business in a Deemed Illegal Industry. For better experience, I would suggest you to switch to 1.25x speed, and also don't miss to subscribe at the rate MSME Talk on YouTube, Apple and Spotify. Today we have with us Jahan Jamas, co-founder and chief strategy officer of Bombay Hemp Company, also called as Boheco. We have with us Jahan, who is a co-founder of Boheco. Which is, in fact, Boheco is backed by Ratan Tata, who has recently passed away, but has invested in so many startups and given so much inspiration. So based on the learning, mistakes, success, Jahan will take us through how to navigate compliance challenges while growing strictly regulated business which might be deemed to be illegal or prohibited with strict regulation, or at times maybe no regulation present. So let me welcome Jahan Jamas on the show now.
Thank you so much, Tripti. It's a great pleasure to be here on the MSME Talks podcast, and greatly looking forward to a fascinating conversation ahead.
Thank you, Jahan. Wonderful to see you on MSME Talk podcast. So, Jahan, to begin with, first of all, let us understand a bit into Bombay Hemp Company and Jahan as a role, playing there, because it's very, very interesting to know about both.
Absolutely. Happy to help out with the short background about our work, Tripti. As you correctly mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders, and I'm also the chief strategy officer at Bombay Hemp Company, also called Boheco. We started Boheco 11 years ago as 7 co-founders. Before that, we were all friends in college together. And it was during our college days where we used to undertake social enterprise projects, work with rural communities, provide them solar electrification and a whole other assortment of benefits to uplift their lives. But every time we traveled India during our college days, we noticed, and I'm sure Tripti, you and your viewers would understand, that India is quite a heterogeneous, diverse country. Every 100 kilometers, everything changes. But wherever we went, even though the food and custom and culture was different, one thing we saw was cannabis, or what we colloquially call bhang in India, was growing in almost every village, every district, every state we visited, and all growing wild. So naturally, we got curious to say, okay, listen, there are only 2 uses that we know. Either someone's growing for the black market, or either the police and narcotics are coming and burning down this field. But then gradually we learned from the village community that no, India has a history of the subsistence use of the hemp or the cannabis plant, whether it is using the oil from the seed in stretch marks, whether it is using the fiber from or stalk to make sweaters or jumpers during winter, or it was using the seed oil to make chutneys, which are a delicacy during winter times to increase in nutrition, or whether it was even using the leaves, what we call bhang, and which is consumed in a religious event and occasion, was also used historically in Ayurveda for a range of different formulations for pain, sleep, diarrhea, cough, cold, and a host of others. And that really blew our mind, that it was rural India that actually had this dominance of knowledge how bhang or hemp as a plant could be utilized in a positive manner. And that got us thinking. Around the same time, during our college summer holidays, I visited West Australia, where my extended family live, and I toured the rural belt, and I realized that there were small towns that were rebuilding the economy using the hemp or cannabis plant. And even though indigenously or historically the plant never grew in that town, they actually brought it in such a way that today it's one of their number 1 cash crops. They use it to make their surfboards, building materials, their salads, foods, cosmetics, and medicines. So this was a 2-part eureka moment to say, look, the world, including China, Canada, Australia, are using this hemp and cannabis plant that ironically belong to India for thousands of years. But we have sat on this resource like a latent resource and never realized this potential. So that got us thinking that maybe it's worth at least exploring this domain, worth giving it a shot. And that's where a few years after college, 7 of us founders came together who were originally part of these social projects. And we said, if not now, then when? We're young 20-year-olds. Now is the time to try something new. And that is where Boheco first began as the first ever hemp or cannabis company in India's post-independence history. We were focused majorly around, and we've been focused around three foundations at the company. One is around policy and regulation. The second being around research, both the fundamental as well as the clinical research. And third, obviously, is in building the industry and category from zero or sub-zero levels. And that is essentially where, whether it's policy and regulation, as you can understand, something as tricky and stigmatized as cannabis or bhang can garner an ill reputation. But being able to help a regulator demystify it, understand its benefits, and be able to enact it from a policy point of view, and then connect it to a value chain that eventually leads to industry that includes clinical trials on medicines, includes breeding varieties that could be given to farmers for cultivation, partnering with government, academic, scientific institutes, and at the end of the day, catering to above 75,000 users and patients over the last several years, all through doctors, online channels, offline channels, and building an omni-channel behemoth that is focused on a multi-state endeavor to bring hemp and cannabis into people's households and their livelihoods and economies as well. So that's just a brief background, but happy to dive more into detail as we go along, Tripti.
Yeah, thank you so much. Such a detailed working and strategical working being done by Boheco, and it's just not about working on the product side, but you have seen, oh, there's something such a valuable thing which is being labeled as illegal and prohibited, but is being traditionally used for so many years. How to bring back to the mainstream and remove this label of prohibition and illegal in a rightful manner.
Exactly.
So that's wonderful and great, Jahan, and we'll understand more how you have done this ahead in our today's discussion. So in today's discussion, we are seeking guidance from you based on all this learning of couple of last of years, and specifically focusing on those entrepreneurs who hold ambition to grow business, but they are facing the highly restricted, restrictions are there in those areas of segments and industries. And how do they can learn some bits about from you and your company, uh, leading it to which kind of a huge efforts into legal and compliances management they have to go through it. So to begin with, Jahan, we have divided today's discussion in a couple of segments, okay? And to begin with the basic one. So when someone is starting this journey, the initial part is the research. Research of understanding the landscape of which we are today standing into it. So what specific resources or method did you use to understand the regulatory landscape, and how can others can replicate from your working in their segments and markets?
That's a great place to start, Tripti, because honestly, the first question we asked ourselves at Boheco is it even legal to work with hemp in India? So that is where, through our history and experience, just to give you a bit of background, when we started, our first action was to reach out to the government. And we wrote 65, 70 mails to not just political machinery, but the bureaucrats, additional secretary, joint secretary, central level, state level. And the reason we did this is because we spent time reading the law and understanding where the gaps on law exist. So that is one definite feedback and advice for any entrepreneur, is before entering an industry which has a potential of stigma, is understand what all laws and policies apply to it, what is relevant, and naturally, as you read and through common logic, you will start seeing where the gaps are coming in identified. As we did that, we began engaging. We reached out to the likes of the Director of Narcotic Control, who is the policy maker of India's NDPS Act. As we can imagine, something like cannabis garners a reputation as a narcotic and will be under a certain act. And it's, of course, one of the most rigorous acts, as we've seen through a lot of media. But what we did is we reached out to the bureaucrat and the relevant bureaucrats there, and we said, look, we have understood the policy that there are certain opportunities that can be explored. For example, when we define cannabis as a narcotic in India, you only refer to two parts of the plant. You refer to the flower, what we colloquially call ganja, and you refer to the resin from the flower, what we call charas. But every other part of the plant, that's the stalk that can be used in textiles, or the seed that can be used in food, nutraceuticals, and cosmetics, or even the leaf that can be used in Ayurvedic medicines. All of these are not classified as narcotic under your act. So that is the first point of recognition with the regulator. The second point is, okay, these materials aren't under a narcotic act, but under what regulation do they fall? So that leads to a further cascade where we, for example, with stock, our first endeavor was to work with the Ministry of Textiles, get this classified as a natural fiber, like jute or like cotton, like rami, but with similar or superior properties in different domains. Similarly, we worked with FSSAI, the Food Safety Standards Authority, for 5 years as an industry partner, made submissions, created a dossier of international and domestic information. And finally, hemp seeds got classified as a food grade ingredient. And then finally, we started working on using the hemp leaf, or what we call bhang, and we began working with the Ayurveda, the Ayush regulator, started doing clinical trials, preclinical work, getting licenses for a host of medicines and formulations, both topical and consumable, in oils, balms, tinctures, capsules, and a host of other areas and avenues. But this was the latter part of the journey. As we started, we realized two important things. If a model or a precedent doesn't exist where you are, there is naturally someone who has done it in some part of the world. Understand their model first, and see what can be retrofitted and purposed according to your cultural on your business requirements. For example, for us, we had ready-made models in the likes of Canada, in the likes of China, that are building billion-dollar hemp and cannabis industries, to understand what they did right, and most importantly, to understand that what they can do perhaps may not be in our ambit, but there are definitely things they can't or won't do that is possible from our perspective. So capitalize on those opportunities becomes very critical from a regulation standpoint, and communicating it with the regulator. You see, one thing is that it's not that bureaucrats and regulators are cynical in India. It's just that they need to be given an understanding that there are existing successful models that help solve problems or challenges in their head that would come up in the natural course of business in creating a new policy. The second thing was, as you start as a new company or a young enterprise, you don't have the credibility. For example, when we went to a bureaucrat, we spent a good 1 hour, 2 hour explaining our strategy outline. The first question out of his mouth is, how old are you guys? So that is where the mindset is, right, of everyone. Where 21, 22 year olds, we were very lucky. He was a positive minded person where he said, I'm encouraged by young entrepreneurs trying something daring, trying something new, wanting to work with government. Not everyone wants to work with government first. And that really builds a good credibility. In such cases, these are unique cases, but in the case of the norm, it's very important to start finding people with relevant experience in industry domains. When you're working with a regulator, when you're working political machinery, it's important to build credibility. But as a young organization, you don't always have the chance. That is where it's important to turn to thought leaders and experienced personnel who've either worked with the government and are retired, or at a senior level and have the time to give you guidance. For example, one of our first advisors was a former narcotic commissioner of India. We had incidentally found him, and it takes a lot of work and research into regulation, requires a lot of second hand and third hand work. Not everything is available on Google, not everything can be accessed through AI. A lot of it can be accessed though through dialogue and communication. So that is where it is quite serendipitous. We had just started the company 6 months in. There was a media article about a certain yatra being undertaken in North India, where he was, this gentleman, Mr. Bhattacharjee, was quoted talking about how there is a cultural use where during the yatra there is bhang plants that grow naturally in parts of North India, but during the yatra, members of the yatra would just pick the bhang plant, rub it, smoke it, and continue on with their religious pilgrimage. So that got our interest, that this is the first person in bureaucracy who was actually talking about this. So we found out his contact number, his information, etc. Reached out to him, went to New Delhi, spent time with him, and we got his buy-in to say, look, I will guide you and advise you along the way. And 11 years later, he's still our advisor and well-wisher in every manner possible. So I think that is a key motivator, is actually creating dialogue with bureaucrats. And most importantly, one thing to understand is they are not always comfortable, because when they're in office, they don't have the time to build a rapport. So it's important to use your first introductions and not give up in term before you get the knock on the door, because sometimes it took us 4-5 months to get meetings, but you have a 10-minute meeting, and that meeting can make your next 1 year.
See, that also helped you a lot in the early research part of your
100%. This
business.
this really helped out a lot in the early research part, because this gave us a scope to understand. For example, during dialogue
Hmm.
is when we understood that states like Uttarakhand had a historical policy that would allow for the collection of hemp stock by the tribal or the Kumaon communities, so that they could use it in self-help
Got
groups for handloom or subsistence purposes. But if we would never be able to find that information online. It was only after we spoke to
Hmm.
one additional secretary officer who connected us to a forest officer who connected us to a former chief secretary, that you learn this piece of information offhand.
So lot of hard work on the ground level
Yes,
in the with the people who were actually dealing with it since so many years and knew it, the pros, cons, loopholes, or the, we can't say loopholes, but the opportunities which you could have used it.
absolutely. Honestly, that like till date, some of our closest ecosystem advisors still give us the advice and guidance towards certain geographies. On how to be able to tackle it. For example, in Uttarakhand, one of the reasons a policy was created for cultivation was, of course, doubling farmer income, of course, providing more livelihood and opportunities. There are a lot of primary benefits, providing taxation revenue to the government, etc. But one of the benefits which the senior forest officer, who's an advisor of ours, had guided the government on, is that in a lot of parts of rural Uttarakhand are barren. The parts that are not barren and have agriculture land, the biggest problem is man-animal conflict. That is, wild cattle or bovine or goats will stray into the field and eat the crop, which happens very commonly there. But all of these animals don't like hemp or bhang. So the thought being, can you ring fence your primary crop with this? So that completely reduces any potential conflict you have with the animal. So being able to have that perspective, sitting in Mumbai, I would never have that perspective. But it was only the guidance of someone who's been there and seen that, and learning from them during dialogue, spending hours with them, and like traveling on public transport with them for hours, do you actually get to learn these things. Similarly, another thing I learned is, in certain states, hill states, we had bureaucrats, IPS officers tell us that they had hundreds of acres they had to climb. They had to climb up hills to get to wild cannabis cultivation. Their whole budget, that time the department budget could only sanction one chainsaw that 30 police officers had to share to cut the crop. And within 5 minutes, the chainsaw stops working because the stock is so strong. So, this is the problem for them. Now they need help to solve this, but you can only learn this when you're spending that time with them and offering that time without expecting anything in return.
Hmm. Okay. So, Jahan, tell us, was there any key regulation you faced, in your business, and which was like, some kind of a practical strategy for that, which became a roadblock to you, and you worked upon on that.
Absolutely. So, Tripti, I think just to give provide a perspective, as I had mentioned earlier, and to unpack it a little bit, we realized at the get go that working with hemp or cannabis will be a multi sector, multi ministry, multi regulation affair, because we are talking about different parts of the plant that act as a raw material to different industries. We will need to desegregate this and offer that perspective in the mind of the government. So that was the first step. We were invited to a meeting about 12 months in, where the senior bureaucrat in charge of the NDPS Act had actually assisted us to convene a center and state government meeting where officials came from multiple states along with central ministries, where they sat down, and for 2 hours the stage was ours. And we laid out what we thought would be the best regulatory strategy, what should flow into what. What we helped identify is that when we are talking of the fiber or the stock, the use case was free and clear. So, being able to couple it with departments like textiles or work with the Ministry of Environment and Forests becomes critical.
So, Jahan, now we will move to the next segment where we want to, reach to the next level where we are establishing the business. So far, it was more about understanding the research and setting the background and getting deeper into the context of the industry and the regulations and how, manage those, understanding the entire
Right.
gamut of things. But now, if when we move towards establishing the
Yes.
business, one important part which is there. I'm not talking about various part of the business establishment because it's too short for a one podcast episode to discuss all that. But important part which we want to discuss today is the legal partner or a legal counsel. Having a right legal partner is very crucial in this aspect. So, what criteria should entrepreneurs consider while selecting a legal counselor or regulatory expert as per you? Because for your business, you would have gone through that journey a lot. I do understand you have a co-founder from this space, but still there'll be a lot more to be, iron out and, make it as a strength of the business. So your guidance on that.
Absolutely. That's a great question, Tripti. And I think there are certain parameter we do consider when we're looking at legal counsel. Number one, it starts with the industry specific expertise. Being able to have a counsel who knows how to navigate your industry. Not specifically, for example, we worked with hemp or cannabis, so there's no legal precedent. But you needed the ingenuity to be able to cast a future forecast that under this regulation this would exist, and this regulation exists for Ayurveda already under this Cosmetics Act or this Narcotics Act or a host of other applications. So their expertise specifically to your industry becomes very critical. And that, I think, coupled with the depth of the regulatory knowledge is very crucial. Depth being the objective term here, the ability to understand how licensing and state by state regulation works in India is very critical. As we understand, in India, we have multiple states with multiple different types of regulation. So being able to create a common alignment or synergy becomes very important from your legal partner's perspective as well. Similarly, I think the third thing that really stands out is their experience in networking with authorities. Having a legal partner who understands the language and dialogue a bureaucrat, a regulator, or a license provider would give becomes extremely critical. I think a few other things that do stand out is the ability for them to offer integrated legal support, whether it's across contracts, structuring your enterprise, financial transactions, licenses, this corporate disputes, and a whole host of others. You need somebody who has that empathetic shoulder from a legal point and can provide that degree of integration, because it is impractical to have one legal partner for one service and another legal partner for another. And of course, most importantly, having some kind of in-house, I would say, degree of control or measurement or evaluation becomes very critical. I think from a qualitative point, there are a few things that do stand out. It's very important to have legal or regulatory partners who have an eye on the future of what law and regulation look at. That is, legal partners who have a depth in research, who are reading about international and global laws that may have retrospective effect at some point in time in the future in the industry or space that you're working in. Naturally, a few things do stand out is accessibility and open communication. We have had encounters with other entrepreneurs who have had a range of legal services from the best of the best, but sometimes the best of the best may not be as per your interest, because they may not give you the time, effort, or energy that you may require. And most importantly, having the degree of value and cost across different projects and different arrangements becomes equally critical. That's why having a legal partner with the right agility becomes very, very critical in these domains as well. And I think finally the most important aspect is the multidisciplinary knowledge, that the ability for them to navigate areas like IP, which becomes very critical from the novelty of your company, all the way up to how to handle and navigate GST related issues, as well as export and import related issues for a whole host of
Yeah.
companies.
So basically, you are going into the holistic thing. Okay, not only the depth, but the breadth of the knowledge of the legal counsel should be there, and little bit future focused, considering legal counsel is able to see what could be the changes coming up in last couple of years, where they can go and also convince and fight for the changes in the regulation. At the same time, when we are in a place like India, the different states have different regulation, how to navigate different states. Don't need to go to different council, but maybe with one council team you're able to navigate these things becomes very crucial. So Jahan, a small point where you have gone through the lot of licensing processes, any one or two points would you like to share which can become like a common mistakes people might be doing when they're taking going through the licensing journey?
Absolutely. I think, Tripti, one thing to keep in mind for anyone in any licensing journey for new industries is that your first time of licensing will not be easy. Because you have to go to a government regulator, you have to explain to them the mission that you are aiming to solve through this. Because it isn't about just one company getting a license. It means that the entire levy is opened up for any any person to potentially become a license holder. That is where, through our experience, what we have learned is constant communication and dialogue becomes key. On day one, a regulator won't give you a license, but you have the liberty to keep working with them till you meet their criteria to be able to solve for license. For example, we became one of the first license holders for Ayurvedic medicines using the extract from the bhang leaf. But it wasn't an easy journey. It required a lot of conviction to the deputy drug controller of the state, where we're looking at licensing, providing Ayurvedic references, providing safety data, most importantly showing them how we as a company or as an organization will preemptively take measures to ensure safe and equitable distribution, that there will be no degree of abuse, that there'll be no degree of liability that will eventually come on the head of the license issuer in the first place. So I think that is the most important aspect of it, is as a company we also have a onus to make a free and fair representation to a licensing authority of what type of measures we aim to take post licensing to ensure that there is a degree of safety and confinement to the category, industry, claims and end user that we are aiming to direct our product towards. So I would say these are some of the core learnings
Mm.
that we picked up along the way, and of course constant dialogue with your licensing and regulatory authorities, whether it's a personal assistant, whether it's a class 4 officer, whether it's the main senior class A officer, doesn't matter. You have to start somewhere. It's only when you sit with them will you understand why they've not given a license so far and what you would need to do to change
Mm.
that.
Got it. Okay. So now, when we have started working and establishing the business through licensing and all kind of work, one important aspect in this journey of compliances and navigating regulatory aspect is documentation and compliance. Now, which at times is overlooked by the businesses. Is there any process at the early stage which you guys have set across in your company, which we can say as best practices for you, which has helped you?
Absolutely, Tripti. I think step number one in terms of documentation for any startup or enterprise we would highly recommend, because we live in a digital age, is to create something called a VDR, a virtual data room. And that VDR should contain all of your policy, licenses, regulatory documents, right from your shops and establishments act to your final license for your product and services, and everything in between. All your registration, your accounts, your statements, everything should be compiled, categorized into relevant folders, and be accessible only to a select few within the organization. And that should be on a trust basis when you first begin as well. I think the
Okay.
second thing that really stands out is creating a centralized compliance framework, basically developing a system that tracks all applicable laws and regulation, local, state, national, international, and have a review process and mechanism on, because you're a startup you can't review it every month, so it can just be every quarter or every 6 months. But it's important to do this because law changes very fast, policy changes very fast, and there are different sources, whether you're talking India Code, e-Gazette, GST, RBI, a host of websites you can go to constantly keep yourself updated, and it requires that manual effort. I think the second element is to keep track of regular updates to any law or process, but also most importantly, ensure there is constant training to departments in charge of legal and compliance, and most importantly, how that flows outwards. For example, creating claims on a label, then creating a SOP or a set process has to be not communicated. That knowledge can't just rest with my legal team, it has to rest with my product team, my operations team and my marketing team, because each of them are responsible for creating my end product. The product guy will look at what type of ingredients will match the claims that marketing is approved to give, and operations will ensure that
Mm.
there will be a manufacturer or a supply chain that could match this within the relevant timeline. So I think having these steps becomes critical. But coming back to the key point, leveraging technology and using any online technological or digital technological tools to help keep track or abreast of the latest developments becomes very critical as a small as a SME or even a small enterprise.
So, Jahan, while we have discussed about the documentation and compliance part and how it is being done in your organization, and which other entrepreneurs also need to understand, let's go into the little bit of building relationships and stakeholder engagement, which is very important in this aspect. You have already shared a lot with us. Okay, is there anything specific way of strategies you follow in engaging with these regulators and industry stakeholders, and also tell us which all other stakeholders we need to take care of,
Understood.
specifically when we are dealing in these kind of highly regulated environment.
Certainly. Happy to help with that, Tripti. I think most important, and just to provide a bit of background of the tactics and strategies that we do deploy, I think most importantly is to ensure that you consistently visit industry or category specific online and offline platforms with the purpose and objective of types of conversations you want to have. For example, we worked in space of hemp and cannabis, but we worked in textiles using hemp, or food using hemp, or medicines using cannabis. Go to the platforms that already exist for pre-existing products and services, and essentially understand what are the gaps and opportunities that can be availed of. When actually dealing with stakeholders, it's important to understand that government is one part, as you correctly said, but as in the case of our industry, there are secondary and tertiary layers of stakeholders. For example, right from a central and state regulator, it also includes academics, includes modern medicine Ayurvedic doctors, includes patients, includes farmers, includes your operations operators for manufacturing, all the way up to delivery and distribution. All of these are part of the flywheel of stakeholders one must consider when you're building an enterprise, and being able to serve the best interest of your organization while being able to balance out the interest of other stakeholders, but not in such a way that there is a degree of imbalance that comes into play. I think most important is being able to create common working groups or associations where exchange of ideas or discussions becomes critical. That is something we also did. We realized that we were alone for too long in the hemp industry, but gradually, over the last few years, smaller companies started coming up. We essentially created one of India's first industry associations that is dealing with the medical use and industrial use of hemp and the cannabis plant. Today has a 30 plus members, which becomes a common forum where grievances are aired that are common and challenges are solved, so that the larger good or the greater good of an industry or the segment you're working in can be taken care of, while your interests as an organization are equally served in the process. I think clear
Okay.
and consistent communication across the regulatory hierarchy, across most importantly in short term goals and long term objectives, becomes very clear when dealing with regulators or bureaucrats. It's important that not everything can work top down. You can't start from the minister and then go downwards. Sometimes you have to start bottom up. You have to knock on the lowest door to eventually get your file moved across to reach the final point for signature. And it's important that you have to be a concierge for that file or documents journey. You have to be a chaperone rather along the way, and that can only happen when you're constantly engaging and communicating with such stakeholders as well. I think a few things qualitatively that do stand out is it's important when you're communicating with stakeholders to build conviction is give them examples or highlights of models of success you've had, and be able to get their feedback on this becomes very critical. I think most importantly is focusing on a long term relationship. When people realize that it's not just a
Hmm.
short term transactional rapport you're looking to build, that there is nothing in it for you today, but you're building a relationship in the hope that there is something in it for both of you tomorrow, that becomes a very strong
Hmm.
driver towards people building conviction
Hmm.
and trust, whether it is you finding a
Hmm.
new commercial
Okay.
distributors at the back end, or whether you're working with government or scientists at the front end as
Hmm.
well.
Hmm. So, Jahan, while all this stakeholder engagement is being done, okay, one of the important stakeholder is your customers. And when you are in an industry where you need to establish the trust, because it's not being already there present, you are starting and developing a new space and market altogether. So how did you work around to build trust with the customers, and any advice when at times people are facing skepticism in this area?
Absolutely. I think the best place to start, Tripti, is what we consider the mantra in building trust. Is today we what we define as an illiterate in the modern day and age isn't just someone who can't read and write. It's someone who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn. And when we are working in something new, because
Mm-hmm.
learning, you've already learned something, you already have a preconceived bias towards it. The biggest challenge is being able to get someone to unlearn and demystify what they thought they knew, and then be able to relearn it in the right way. Being
Yeah,
able to
right.
create that consumer perception starts off when they realize that you are not just selling them a product, you are selling them a concept or a way of life. And that is one of the best learnings that
Mm-hmm.
we had when we first began. When we used to go to flea market, we used to stand for 2 hours, 3 hours explaining to aunties in Hindi and Gujarati that this is hemp, this is like pumpkin seed or flax seed, very nutritious. After 1 hour of explaining to an auntie, she will ask us in Hindi, but ham is non-veg, so why are you selling me non-veg? Now I spent 1 hour of my time, I've lost 1 hour, but maybe I've gained 1 hour, because 5 years later that auntie will come back with her kids and her nephews and nieces who know exactly what hemp is, what CBD is, and they want to make it part of their life.
Hmm.
So being able to be there with the consumer through that course of that journey becomes very critical. And being, I think one of the most important things was being able to move perception. When we first began, one of the first things we did is we worked in the domain of garments and fabrics. So we did a survey, an
Mm-hmm.
offline survey, and asked people, when I say a hemp shirt, what do you think? Almost every response was a t-shirt with Bob Marley on it. But today when we did the same survey and we asked someone, what when we ask you what a shirt made of hemp is, they say it's durable, it's lightweight, it's UV protectant, better than cotton, better for my farmers, less water absorbent. So that journey of that knowledge of consumer from not zero but sub zero to 1 and then to 10 is sort of the journey that we saw and we undertook as well. And I think one thing that really
Hmm.
began was beginning the education at home, that the caregivers
Yeah.
become a key responsible asset towards this. For example, we've had a host of medicines for pain management, sleep, anxiety, and a host of others. And with that, we work with many doctors who prescribe these products to patients. We've had patients who come with stage 4 cancer, who advanced arthritis, autism, fibromyalgia, and a host of others. And many of these patients are coming to us as a last resort. When it helps them, in many cases, their patients and their families continue to purchase medicines, maybe not related to the same area, maybe for hair care or skin care or managing something a little less serious. But that trust was established. I tried something, and now my grandmother can, from this company that is a medicine, I believe in it so much that my grandmother can now try their topical oil for her arthritis. We've had 85-year-old ladies turn up at the doctor's clinic at 10 o'clock at night saying, why did you wait 30 years to give me this oil? This helped me in 24 hours. So, and the surprising part is that it is the elder generation, what we thought would be the most conservative, that are now becoming the biggest voice and advocates for this within their societies and communities. There was an elderly gentleman who was on benzodiazepines for sleep. He Someone had approached us through some connects. We connected to a doctor. Today he's completely off benzodiazepines. He only uses our medicine SOS. But because of him, his entire community of other elders he meets in the morning now also take our medicines for anxiety, for insomnia, for pain, for this issue, for that issue. So being able to build that trust from home and from your communities becomes very important. And being able to build
Hmm.
quality products where results are given automatically helps them move from curiosity to adoption, which is the end journey that you want to be able to take.
Hmm. Hmm.
The key question is in what life cycle
Hmm.
that is sort of achieved as well. So there were a lot of entry barriers, but being able to build around these strategic moats really drives someone forward as a catalyst.
So, Jahan, now while your working has happened with the customers in a way where customers have been educated over a period of time, and when customers have got educated and understood, and then they've experienced the benefit, and the benefit experience is then again they have become the voice for you, and they have got into the marketing piece by automatic marketing, word of mouth marketing happening for Bombay Hemp Company. uh, is there any other specific business marketing strategies which you would like to, guide our entrepreneurs who are into regulated space, highly regulated or prohibited
100%,
space?
Tripti, because we've made the journey, the hard yards. We've had to work with all your e-commerce guys at the back end through legal and get things passed. Finally, they're passed. Our job is to try and make it easier for entrepreneurs in this space. When you're starting with something unique, the best place to start is being able to build out content that becomes unique and original to you. Whether it's blogs, thought pieces, educational content, material, whatever platform you have, publish it, because through SEO and through SEO dominance, gradually you will get boosted up. You may start on page 73 when someone looks up a concept like buy organic paper or eco-friendly paper. But the more you publish, the more you read, the more you share your findings, the more you become the thought leader or key opinion leader for something. But till that point in time, it's important to start working with existing key opinion leaders and thought leaders in online and offline communities, as you correctly said, Tripti, to communicate the message through word of mouth, because they already have existing communities. They can help you have a ripple effect in terms of the benefit. Naturally, performance marketing on keywords becomes very important, but I'll just give you an example. For example, in our case, using the word cannabis or CBD was not allowed by Meta or Google at the back end. So we had to get innovative, find alternative terms, play not just on cannabis or CBD, but what it is being used for chronic pain, for sleep, for insomnia. Play on the benefit first and on the uniqueness second. If it gets too unique or too prohibitive for you as a young entrepreneur, is one thing that really stands out. A couple of other things I think most importantly is, we're in the day of online, but it's also equally important to have a complementary offline touch point. And that's why working with the conventional offline touch points within a 5 kilometer radius of your community is the best place to start. Start in the 5K and then build out from there.
Hmm.
Whether it's a kirana store, whether it's a pharmacy,
Hmm.
whether it's a chemist, whether it's
Yeah.
just a general trade store, doesn't matter. Use them as your voice to build within your community becomes very critical. And use unconventional
Yeah.
BTL activities. I'll give you an example. Naturally, this is a common
Hmm.
example, but partnering with your local newspaper vendor to have your brochures, have your pamphlets in the mix. Another example I learned of is that there are companies that when religious pilgrims undertake yatras for long periods, they have tents where they give you free massages with their oil. And a brilliant marketing, right? So but and it comes at a cost to the company, but now millions of people know about you, but only because you are willing to be a little unique, unorthodox, unconventional with the approach. And I think the final thing is being able to find new modes of vernacular communication. Today Insta is done to death. Everyone, when you're going through reels and ads, it's just so oversaturated, you're losing the mind share of a person. They barely have a second. But what if there are apps like Moj that are alternative apps that you can market on? What if there are websites that are related to your industry where you can advertise on, banner advertise on, where people who are your natural audience fit, who are a better fit for what you're selling, will come to, as compared to you having a spray and pray approach jahan pe, or where you just put it in a general media. You just put a random ad in a newspaper, not understanding whether it's Hindi or English that's catering to your audience, who's going to read the paper, what is the end output of it. As compared to that, in digital medium or just spending random dollars on Meta and Instagram, target it into into vernacular mediums where there is benefit. For example, Cuckoo FM, brilliant radio FM channel, right? But they do everything vernacular. They do it in Tulu, in Kannada, in Telugu. Now, if you want to explore into those markets, maybe those are the types of people who will be listening to the type of product you want to sell. So, being able to have a multi-layered marketing approach becomes very critical, and thinking on your feet and not just following trends becomes very, very essential to really establish your uniqueness.
Got it. So now next move, our point of discussion today, Jahan, is adaptability. So Boheco has gone through a long journey from starting where no regulation was existing, first company getting into these products. I'm sure there would have been timings when you have to pivot or you have to shut certain part due to regulations, and hence bringing out your adaptability out. So can you share some examples from real thing? Did any time happen with you that you have to absolutely pivot from certain product which you were
100%.
trying to work on, or
100%,
may have
Tripti.
to discontinue?
Absolutely. So I think, Tripti, the best place to start is we live in an age where, as a company, it's better to dream of being a camel than a unicorn. And I'll explain why. It's because a camel is one of the most adaptable animals. Without water, without food for days, months, and years, you have to be ready for that level of commitment to adaptability. First comes first. During our journey, we've had plenty of moments of pivot. One thing to keep in mind is that we led with a commodity or raw material over a product. So we needed to be able to be fast in terms of pivoting. So for example, we started with fashion and fabric because regulation was more favorable there. But gradually over the years, regulation opened for foods and health and wellness, where we reached a critical point incidentally 6 months before COVID hit India, where we realized that we can't run on all engines. You need to be able to pick a lane sometimes and be able to bet on where the future industry is going to be. And sometimes it requires hard calls and being able for you to be able to take a hard right turn in very complicated situations. But that is the sacrifice you make as an entrepreneur, that you have to be able to be nimble on your feet to say that even after pivoting, whatever I have built in my assets, I will not just let go. I will run it on a 20% function. 80% of my function is now focused on my new pivot, on the new focus area. And most importantly, whenever you're pivoting into a new avenue, give it at least 3 to 5 years. Don't be thinking 6 months or 1 year timelines towards larger ideas. If they're smaller ideas, you have the ability to pivot nimbly. If it's small product.
So I think that point, Jahan, is not applicable for startups. Nowadays, startups saying that within 2 years they can get over the
Exactly.
success.
And that is one thing, that's one success we've seen with startups, that the ability to rapidly pivot in smaller product segments becomes very important. But when you're looking at pivoting away from, for example, an entire space, if you do it overnight, your chances of success drastically reduce. So you need to have a thought through plan to say, if I'm moving from industry A to industry B, for example, a large restaurant aggregator now wanting to do events and activities, it requires you to build the foundation before you even make the jump there. You can't do it overnight. It's being able to do that overnight, like, you may have some success, but then your foundation has to be very strong in these cases. One thing we learned is that most important is adaptability can only come when you're listening to your customer. It's only when your customer is telling you
Mhm.
that you are heading in the wrong direction is when you need to be able to look at pivoting into a direction that feeds into their benefit and interest. And that's why I think the core principle for us, and one thing we've learned from larger companies that have been successful at pivoting very quickly, is before you ever pivot, run pilots and experiments at a smaller scale. Do it for 3 months, 6 months. If it works, scale it up for another few months. If that works, your engines are ready to go, the light is green, you can move forward in that domain. So I think that is extremely important, that it's important to be able to be quickly adaptable, but it's also to be mindful that in the industry you're working, maybe the business macro external business environment may not allow you to be adept in certain areas, but you can be nimble and adaptable in certain avenues as well.
So, Jahan, while adapting to the different kind of situation, for the example, you've said COVID. COVID had most of the businesses have faced the COVID situation, have pivoted. What about the crisis management? Now, is there some kind of process you strategically have made in your organization that we anticipate XYZ kind of crisis may come in the future and we need to prepare for that? So, do you suggest these kind of strategies to our listeners?
Certainly, Tripti. And I think the best place to start is that, look, because we worked across the value chain, the degree of crisis we have been exposed to, minor and major, is so diverse and varied. Right from external crisis like regulatory misperception to even lack of consumer acceptability, even to internal crises, whether it's inability to stick to launch timelines due to supply chain delays, or facing attrition risks in key channels or domains. I think a few tools that really helped us be able to preempt and assess crisis. The first place would definitely be conducting a pestle analysis. That is your political, economic, social, technological,
Okay.
environmental, and legal risk
Yeah.
analysis in every domain you're going to enter. and be able to track that on a I would say half yearly or a yearly basis becomes very critical. But I think in real time there are a few management frameworks that have helped us really stem the tide during choppy waters. One of them, a couple of them that do stand out. One is one called Coombs Crisis Management Framework. It basically speaks of three levels of crisis.
Okay.
One is a pre-crisis, where you're managing the issue, you're communicating the risk, and you're preparing for the best of the best and the worst comes worst. Then there is the crisis event, recognizing what the crisis is, containing it, and then resolving it. And then there's the post-crisis event, where you're in the aftermath. You're evaluating what this will lead to and what lessons need to be learned so that this doesn't happen again. That is one of the tools that has really helped us from a framework point of view. Equally, there is a model called a double P, double R model. Double P meaning prevention and preparedness. That is, always be preemptive in preparing to avoid crises, any measures possible. But also keep in mind that any plan that you make may not survive first contact with the enemy. And that's why preparedness for any crisis becomes very critical. And marrying this with response and recovery, that is your immediate action when the crisis is happening, how your teams are managing, who's handling what and who's communicating what, becomes very critical. And the recovery, that is essentially to bring you back to status quo or the norm, what timeline and what process you're looking at to actually build towards this. These, I would say, objective tools. But naturally, in the case of crises, communicating them and having a model for communication. For example, we've relied on a Bowen crisis communication model, where you focus on ethical and clear communication, but you also highlight the steps and responses to outcome measures as you go forward from an evaluation standpoint. So both stakeholders, your external and your internal stakeholders, understand that things are returning to the norm.
Wonderful. And specifically when you're working in a highly regulated space and very prone to, legality and illegality kind of a regulations, it makes very much sense to get prepared for your crisis situations. And you have definitely shared wonderful tools with us like PPRR and pastels and Bowen models. So I hope our listeners should, at least try to dive into it and try to incorporate. Now let's moving on ahead, Jahan. When we have done discussion on the marketing piece, stakeholder management, crisis management kind of stuff, uh, staying informed for the as an ongoing strategy for the business. So in that aspect, what kind of strategy do you use to keep up with the regulatory changes, and how can the audience establish their own systems for remaining informed in these kind of a thing? One of the thing which I understood from you is ensuring compliances etc are regulatory checked. Okay. In that aspect I would like to say, Jahan, we had covered an episode couple of episodes back on compliance tracking, where we have covered a regulatory tracking company which does automated regulatory tracking of all the your particular business and industry in perspective of India, and everything is through dashboard. So whether you are reaching any compliance issues or you have crossed any compliance issues, everything is tracked and escalated on the timely manners. So that could be wonderful tool. But what else could be there when we talk about staying informed?
Tripti, I think you've really caught the pulse on this. It is actually a complement, multi-layered, multi-tiered platform strategy you need for this. For example, you need to combine existing tools, as you mentioned, a regulatory tracker, with qualitative customized tools and resources that you build as an entrepreneur. For example, in our case, one thing we've understood is we've split this across different dimensions. So for example, for legal or regulatory changes, our team uses existing tools or platforms like India Code, e-Gazette, notifications, tracking manually notifications in newspapers, advertorials that the government is mandated to do in certain types of projects or certain types of systems. But for example, for finance and company related, our team is focused on regular updation on the GST portal, RBI website, MCA, CBIC, SEBI, Labor Ministry, and tracking these on a monthly and quarterly basis, keeping in mind that policy and regulation can move swiftly in different domains. When we speak of industry or sector related, I would say one of the greatest resources we've seen our industry associations, whether it's FICCI, whether it's ASSOCHAM, whether it's CII, or even smaller mercantile chambers at a local or regional level, they tend to build summary reports of local industry and regional industry that really help you get up to speed of where things truly stand. Um, whether we're talking tax or law, we use already existing Live Law, Taxman, Clear Tax, and other platforms, and of course macro strategic using clear cut media, the likes of Economic Times, Financial Times, Mint, to be able to observe what are the larger trends that you need to be spotting, because you won't get precisely what you need, but you need to be able to be thinking laterally when you're consuming media to say, okay, this could have some relevance to some upcoming policy development that we're doing within state A or state B. So I would say these are sort of a couple of the rules, but it's important to build your own in-house system, customized according to your company needs and requirements, and be able to marry it or match it with existing online trackers and systems as well.
Right. So, Jahan, let's understand the important part of your business, which is innovation. For you, it cannot stop because you have so much of opportunity to, expand, because you're into industry which you're developing an industry altogether from scratch. So, how you are balancing innovation along with compliances? What is the process you guys are following?
Absolutely. I think Tripti, it's a very dynamic relationship between innovation and compliance. And one thing we've learned is innovation is built in the shadow of your company's vision. That it has to be driving towards your company's goals and objectives. Innovation for innovation's sake is meaningless. For example, it is during the journey of innovation that we've come out with some incredible innovations. One of the things that we had developed was a graphene-like material through a proprietary process of carbonizing the fiber of hemp that could be used in
Okay.
ultracapacitors, battery operating systems, water filtration devices, and a host of others. It led us to platforms the likes of working at Singularity University 7 years ago. I spent a few months there as part of a fellowship where we were engaging with Tesla and Elon Musk's team, Samsung's team, Google's team, and we realized that innovation truly comes when you are thinking above and beyond the existing defined parameters in your head. And that can only come by having an open innovation strategy and approach, when new innovation techniques and methods are always encouraged amongst employees. Because innovation isn't only limited to product innovation or process innovation. It also expands itself into the delivery mechanism of innovation of thought between employees and personnel to come out with new ideas of how to be able to do business, or how to be able to meet a consumer's needs in a faster manner. One of the things we've done is we've built constant feedback loops. We run a unique program called a PRP, a patient review program. So before the launch of any product, we do preclinical and clinical work, but we also have an internal consumer panel where we essentially conduct reviews of the products, and basis the feedback of patients is where we kind of make a key difference in the marking advantages that our products tend to offer as well. So creating a constant feedback loop, most importantly investing in R&D, because R&D is where you will build your IP moat and your pipeline. So being able to create that in a clear, concise manner becomes very critical. And adopting technology driven services where, for example, in our case, we created an end-to-end telemedicine and digi-health model to prescribe our medicines during COVID when no clinics were open. So that is what innovation counts for. Another example is when we need to develop a formulation during COVID. Our chief scientist was sitting in Worli in Mumbai. Our pharmacologist was sitting in Chembur. Our doctor was sitting in Kandivali, and I was sitting in Powai. We had to ensure at every step of formulating a product, the product had to reach these 4 different marks and then come back in the same 4 different marks for a critical feedback mechanism, and achieve that in 30 days. So being able to work quickly and agile, but most importantly, leaning in on R&D becomes very, very critical to the innovation process, and having an open innovation philosophy should be the guiding force of a
So,
company.
along with that, Jahan, what I was trying to understand, compliance, incorporating compliances in the innovation only. So, do you start tracking compliance at the initial stage only for the innovation, or you let the innovation come out and work, and then let checking of compliances happen?
Absolutely. So honestly, it is a bit dynamic, Tripti, and I'll give you one specific example. We were looking to set up a clinic in Bangalore and Karnataka. Now, to set up a clinic using our type of medicine, a certain license is required, but the government has never given a license or created a license of that regime. Now, in such a situation, you can't not do business, and there is no compliance that exists. So, what do you do in such a situation? You create a new type of compliance or go between. And that can only happen. So, for example, last we got a no objection certificate based compliance. So, next time we had an audit or a visit from the same regulator, there was an existing certificate to say that you can achieve this as well. So, when it comes to compliance, one thing to understand is the law is as boring as it is interesting. Okay, and that is one message to the entrepreneurs. The more you read into the industry specific compliance you're looking for, the more you will understand that, hold on, there is an opportunity for a product if I change process B to process C that is not defined in law. Now, in these specific cases, because you will be the first model then, and Mr. Tata had always taught us the first one through the door will get shot. So make sure you're wearing your Kevlar, your bulletproof armor. The best way to build Kevlar is ensuring that when you create something new wherein which there is no existing compliance, you have to work with the regulators to find a go-between or interim compliance that would do the trick till the final version of a policy or compliance is there, or otherwise that becomes the new standard and norm as well. Another thing, for example, compliance in our industry, the labeling, the requirements for our type of medicine say it needs to be taken under medical supervision, but it doesn't specify under prescription. But as an industry, we preemptively took the step to be able to make this under prescription, so risk of abuse or diversion is completely minimized. So now when a regulator looks at it, he's seeing that the industry is over-regulating itself deliberately because that there was a vagary or a vagueness in how regulation was framed. So sometimes
being over conscious and not leaving any scope of any doubt or raising
correct.
fingers.
Exactly.
Wonderful.
And see, and it's difficult, Tripti, because sometimes you have to be able to be conservative with your compliance, but sometimes your business needs you to be a little daring and able to push the boundaries. That is where engagement with the bureaucrats, stakeholders, getting consultants who have experience working with them, legal firms working with them, really helps you, because then they can communicate the messaging to them and help you with a new process that never existed.
So, Jahan, let's move to the next part, which is very important, interesting question I'm going to ask is speed. Does speed matter, and specifically when we are into heavily regulated segment, and which needs to build upon a lot of awareness?
Tripti, I think the most important thing for the viewers to keep in mind is when we talk about speed in a regulated industry, it is not the speed of your conventional industries. And I'm sure Tripti already has this in mind when she's asked this question. That is, when we work in deeper regulated industries, what is considered speedy is 6 months, 12 months. Whereas what is considered speedy in a non-regulated, very free-for-all industry is 2 days, 3 days. So there is chalk and cheese difference between this. And keeping that in mind, it's important to understand that as a regulated enterprise, the power isn't always in your hands. You can look to speed up the process as much as you can while working with, for example, a licensing authority. But you can't hasten it so much that you sour them and now they will deliberately delay or cancel your license in the first place. So it's a very delicate, slippery slope. The best you can do is build an internal model which is focused on speed and acceleration of internal process to get to a point of external contact. At external point of contact, you have to create an upper window range and a lower window range of when you estimate things will happen. When you first begin, for example, you create a cultivation policy or you give a first license for a product. The first license may take 180 days to get, but the second to 10th license will take only 90 days to get. So it's important to understand that even policy and compliance has a linear approach when you first begin, but as more bodies and more ecosystem stakeholders get involved to participate, it becomes exponential. Then it reaches 15 days, 30 days from a 180-day process. So speed becomes critical from an internal point of view, but you have to be very mindful and humble and empathetic that we work in a big bureaucratic maze in India. So speed is not its forte, and that is why sometimes the best way is have patience, but always estimate an upper window range best comes best, and a lower window range worst comes worst when an
Yeah.
external stakeholder is involved for compliance.
Yeah. So in this, you have very well said, speed in initial level when you are setting up definitely is longer window. And as the process is set, things start changing and the speed increases and your turnaround time decreases. Apart from that, Jahan, there's also which we see at times because of the expectation, or aspiration to have a faster speed, people try to cut short and take shortcuts,
Yes.
and that might become challenges in the later part of your business. So while you are in regulatory space, be mindful of avoiding the shortcuts which might later on come back on you.
You've really summed it up well, Tripti. One of the first messages we had said as founders is either we can go far or we can go fast, but we can't do both. We'd rather go far because then we know there is legacy, there is something at the end of it. If we go fast, the train will derail before it even starts. And I think we have seen this lesson play out in the Indian startup and SME ecosystem for the last 10, 20 years very clearly. It is the ones that are building for long term far that have survived. The ones that are built just to make a quick buck fly by night are the ones that are running today. So I think you've summarized this very clearly and eloquently.
So, Jahan, we had a wonderful, long, detailed discussion and so much things learned from Bombay Hemp Company's journey and your own experience. We would like to, hear three topmost recommendation or guiding principle you would like to give to entrepreneurs.
I would say three topmost is embrace the boring and the consistent. That is where most of the make or break happens. Most businesses are run as very simple, consistent enterprise. You stick to your process and you abide by it no matter what. That makes a big difference. But all while you do this, always have half of your brain open towards the unpredictable. What is the next event that
Mm.
I can never even fathom or imagine? Keep your mind open to the best and the worst of the unpredictable. So while you're building boring consistency, keep your imagination alive through the unpredictability that awaits you. Number one. Number two is combine your passion for what you're trying to do with compassion for your end user. It's only when you do these two things will you get a successful product that people believe in. And number three, I would say the battle of life and the battle of business is one clear battle. It's a battle of perception versus perspective. How you perceive what you are building versus the end perspective of your end user. And the gap between these two will determine your success and failure as a business enterprise.
Wonderful. You have, summed up very beautifully the three on, directions given to the entrepreneurs, covering from perceptions to the empathy towards your end users. Wonderful. And I would like to share with our audience, while on the camera, Jahan, we cannot make it out. You have recently come out of the surgery, which was a pretty serious surgery. You have gone through it and you are still on your crutches. Thank you so much. While going through all this, you are as enthusiastic as always to share with our
My
audience.
pleasure, Tripti, and I think this is only a testament to the millions of entrepreneurs out there in India who are equally passionate about their ideas. Who, if they were in my situation, I think they'd be doing the same thing, putting the crutches aside, stepping up, and communicating their story of success, just to maybe inspire even a handful someday. So, thank you for
Yeah,
again for having me here.
wonderful. Thank you so much. And see you again sometime on a lot of things we can learn from Boheco.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Tripti, and looking forward to keep associating with yourself and MSME Talks for the foreseeable future as well.
Dear listeners, since last 3 years, you have been listening to MSME Talk audio podcast on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, etc. Now it is available in video format on YouTube as well. Also, I would like to tell that more information and updates are not covered on podcast, for which you have to ensure that you subscribe our newsletter and follow us on social media. Links are given in description.